Welcome to Story Sale English. Today, we are going to tell a true story. It is the story of 4 astronauts who flew around the moon on NASA's Artemis II mission. Their names are Reid Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Koch, and Jeremy Hansen. They launched on April 1, 2026, aboard NASA's Space Launch System rocket from Launch Complex 39B at Kennedy Space Center in Florida. After a mission of about 10 days, they returned safely to Earth on April 10, 2026. This mission was historic. It was the first crewed mission to the moon since 1972. It was also the first crewed flight test of NASA's Orion spacecraft and the first crewed mission of the Artemis program. The flight was designed to test systems in deep space and prepare for future lunar surface missions. The mission also carried several important firsts. Christina Koch became the first woman on a lunar mission. Victor Glover became the first person of color on a lunar mission. Jeremy Hansen became the first Canadian and the first non-American on a lunar mission. Together, the crew represented a new chapter in human spaceflight. But this story is not only about a spacecraft and a rocket. It is also about 4 people who spent years preparing for one journey. Each astronaut came with a different background, a different path, and a different kind of experience. When they flew together, they carried not only equipment and test plans, but also years of training, service, and responsibility. Launch Day. On April 1, 2026, at 6:35 p.m. EDT, the Artemis II mission lifted off. The SLS rocket rose from the pad and sent Orion and its 4 astronauts into space. This was the beginning of a planned test flight around the moon and back to Earth. Soon after launch, Orion's 4 solar array wings deployed successfully, giving the spacecraft the power it needed for the mission. The launch was only the first step. After reaching Earth orbit, the crew and mission control prepared for the next major event, the translunar injection burn. This burn would send Orion out of Earth orbit and onto a path toward the moon. NASA described the mission as a free return trajectory, which means the gravity of the Earth and moon would naturally help guide the spacecraft back home. On April 2, beginning at 7:49 p.m. EDT, Orion's main engine fired for 5 minutes and 50 seconds. That burn successfully pushed the spacecraft away from Earth orbit and started the outbound trip to the moon. It was one of the most important moments of the mission, because after that burn, the crew was truly on the way to deep space. Life inside Orion. For nearly 10 days, the crew lived inside Orion, a capsule often described by the Canadian Space Agency as being about the size of a. That small spacecraft had to serve as cockpit, workplace, dining room, sleeping area, and home. The crew worked, ate, exercised, slept, and carried out tests inside a very limited space. NASA and CSA gave the public some useful details about daily life. The astronauts had scheduled sleep periods, and they attached sleeping bags to the walls to rest. They also had 3 meals per day, with shared meal times, and they tested equipment that future astronauts may depend on during longer missions. Their orange Orion crew survival suits were used for launch and re-entry. But they were also designed to provide a breathable atmosphere for up to 6 days in an emergency. So even though the mission looked dramatic from the outside, much of it depended on careful routines. In deep space, success does not come only from bravery. It also comes from procedure, teamwork, and the ability to keep doing small tasks correctly, day after day, even during a historic flight. Reid Wiseman, the commander of Artemis II, was Reid Wiseman. NASA describes him as a 27-year Navy veteran, a pilot, a father, and an engineer. He was selected as a NASA astronaut in 2009. Before Artemis II, he had already flown to space as a flight engineer on Expedition 41, aboard the International Space Station in 2014. During that earlier mission, Wiseman spent 165 days in space and took part in more than 300 scientific experiments. That mission gave him long-duration spaceflight experience, but Artemis II asked something different of him. This time, he was not just a crew member. He was the commander of the first crew to go back to the moon in more than 50 years. That role mattered. A commander has to understand the spacecraft, the timeline, the people, and the risks. He has to lead calmly and make good decisions under pressure. NASA did not choose Wiseman only because he had flown before. They chose him because his background showed long service, discipline, technical skill, and experience living and working in orbit. Victor Glover, the pilot of Artemis II, was Victor Glover. He was selected as a NASA astronaut in 2013, before Artemis II. He had already served as the pilot of NASA's SpaceX Crew 1 mission to the International Space Station, and also worked there as a flight engineer. During expeditions 64 and 65, Glover also came to NASA with a strong military aviation background. His official NASA biography describes him as a naval aviator and test pilot who flew aircraft including the FA-18 Hornet, Super Hornet, and EA-18G Growler. He was selected as an astronaut while serving as a legislative fellow in the United States Senate. His path to Artemis II included engineering, military service, flight testing, and previous spaceflight. His place on Artemis II also carried historic meaning. Victor Glover became the first person of color to take part in a lunar mission. That fact mattered not only to NASA, but to many people who had never before seen someone like themselves represented in this kind of mission. His selection showed that the face of lunar exploration is broader than it was in the Apollo era. NASA's public materials about Glover often describe his journey as one that can inspire a new generation. That idea fits his story. He was not chosen for symbolism alone. He was chosen because he was a highly qualified pilot with real mission experience. And his presence also marked an important change in who gets to represent humanity in deep space. Christina Koch, one of the mission specialists on Artemis II, was Christina Koch. She became a NASA astronaut in 2013. Before Artemis II, she had already built one of the most impressive records in modern spaceflight. She spent 328 consecutive days in space on the International Space Station during expeditions 59, 60, and 61. That mission made her widely known, but the details are important. NASA says she trained extensively in Russia and flew to space on a Soyuz rocket. During her long stay in orbit, she also took part in the first all-female spacewalks. Her experience showed technical strength, endurance, and the ability to work effectively over a very long mission. On Artemis II, Koch became the first woman on a lunar mission. That was a historic first, but it was also the result of years of preparation and performance. She was not new to difficult missions. She was already one of NASA's most experienced astronauts in long-duration spaceflight. Her role on Artemis II connected two important parts of modern exploration. One part was the long laboratory work of low Earth orbit. The other was the return to deep space near the Moon. In that sense, Christina Koch represented a bridge between what astronauts have learned in orbit and what they will need for future missions farther from Earth. Jeremy Hansen, the second mission specialist on Artemis II, was Jeremy Hansen of the Canadian Space Agency. He is a fighter pilot in the Royal Canadian Air Force. CSA says he also worked for many years as CAPCOM, the voice between the ground and astronauts on the International Space Station. At NASA's Mission Control Center, he was also the first Canadian to lead a NASA astronaut class. His biography also shows how early his path began. According to CSA, he joined an Air Cadet Squadron at age 12, earned glider pilot wings at 16, and earned a private pilot license at 17. Those details show that his journey into aviation began long before he became an astronaut. It was the result of many years of steady work and training. Artemis II was his first space assignment as an astronaut. That makes his story especially striking. His first trip to space was not a short flight to low Earth orbit. It was a mission around the Moon. And on that mission, he became the first Canadian and the first non-American ever to take part in a lunar mission. Jeremy Hansen's story also shows that spaceflight is not only about the people who already flew. It is also about the people who spent years helping missions from the ground, training quietly, and preparing for a chance that might come much later. His path reminds us that exploration often depends on patience as much as talent. The journey to the Moon. As Orion traveled outward, the crew continued mission work and prepared for the lunar flyby. NASA's schedule included equipment checks, suit demonstrations, science tasks, and observations. CSA also highlighted daily life inside Orion, including show-and-tell events, food demonstrations, and explanations of how ordinary tasks work in microgravity. On April 6, 2026, the mission reached an extraordinary milestone. NASA announced that at 12:56 p.m. CDT, the crew surpassed the Apollo 13 record for the farthest distance from Earth ever traveled by humans. At that moment, they were 248,655 miles from Earth. At the farthest point of the mission, Orion would reach about 252,756 miles from Earth. Later that same day came the lunar flyby. NASA said the crew was expected to pass behind the Moon beginning at about 6:44 p.m. During that time, the mission entered a planned communications blackout of about 40 minutes because the Moon blocked radio contact between Orion and the deep space network on Earth. This was not a failure. It was an expected part of flying behind the Moon with Earth-based communications. NASA also said Orion would make its closest approach at about 7:02 p.m., passing about 4,070 miles above the lunar surface. During the flyby, the astronauts saw both the near side and the far side of the Moon. According to the Canadian Space Agency, they used their geology training to observe and photograph lava flows, lunar features, and craters. CSA also reported that the crew surpassed Apollo 13's distance record and became the humans who had flown farthest from Earth. Images from the mission showed small Earth views beyond the moon, long shadows near the terminator, and features such as the Orion Tally Basin. NASA's Earth Observatory said one image was taken at 6:41 p.m. EDT on April 6, as the crew passed behind the moon's far side. CSA also released images showing a crescent Earth in the distance during the lunar flyby. These official images became some of the most memorable visuals of the mission. The return to Earth. After the lunar flyby, Orion looped back toward Earth on its free return path. The spacecraft no longer needed to stay in lunar space. Instead, the gravity of the Earth-Moon system helped guide it home. This was one reason the trajectory had been chosen for this test flight. On April 10, the crew prepared for re-entry. NASA said that when Orion reached 400,000 feet above Earth, while traveling nearly 35 times the speed of sound, the spacecraft would begin first contact with the upper atmosphere. At that point, the astronauts were expected to experience up to 3.9 Gs during the planned entry profile. Plasma around the capsule would also create a planned communications blackout lasting about 6 minutes. Then came the end of the mission. Artemis II splashed down in the Pacific Ocean at 8:07 p.m. EDT on April 10, 2026. Recovery teams retrieved the crew, and NASA later reported that the astronauts were safely extracted from Orion. The next day, April 11, they returned to Houston and were welcomed home at Johnson Space Center after their historic journey around the moon and back. Why this mission matters. Artemis II mattered because it proved that humans could once again travel beyond low Earth orbit and operate in deep space aboard Orion. It also mattered because it was a test flight. The mission was designed to verify systems, procedures, and crew operations before later Artemis missions that aim for the lunar surface. In that way, this mission looked both backward and forward. It honored the long history of lunar exploration, but it was also a preparation for what comes next. It also mattered because of the 4 people on board. Reid Wiseman brought command experience, Navy service, and previous long-duration spaceflight. Victor Glover brought piloting skill, test pilot experience, and his own historic first. Christina Koch brought endurance, engineering experience, and the record of 328 consecutive days in space. Jeremy Hansen brought years of aviation, mission support, and a historic first for Canada. Their backgrounds were different, but together they formed a crew that fit the purpose of Artemis II. This mission was never meant to be only a symbolic trip. It was a demanding test in deep space. NASA and CSA chose 4 people whose training and experience matched that job. So when we remember Artemis II, we should remember both the machine and the people. We should remember the 6:35 p.m. launch, the 5-minute and 50-second burn toward the moon, the record-setting distance from Earth, the 40-minute blackout behind the moon, and the splashdown on April 10. But we should also remember the 4 astronauts whose years of work made that mission possible. This is why Artemis II will be remembered. It was the first crewed mission to the moon in more than half a century. It expanded who is represented in lunar exploration. And it showed that human beings are once again preparing, step by step, to work farther from Earth than most people ever imagined. Thank you for joining Story Sail English. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and share. And in the comments, tell us which astronaut's real journey impressed you the most.